with me this morning on Ukraine, Russia, as well as other topics is Maine Senator Agnes King, a member of both the Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. Senator, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Alex. Good to be with you.
We were just talking about the pressure to increase sanctions on Russia. What would you support in terms of tougher U.S. sanctions, perhaps sector-specific or economic-specific?
Well, I think the sector-specific is one of the areas that we have to look at, but the reality is that in order to be effective, we have to have the Europeans. And, of course, the Europeans' economy is much more tangled up with Russia's than ours are. I think Germany gets 35% of their natural gas from Russia. And that dependency, that energy dependency in Europe is one of the things that's making this such a complicated situation. On the other hand, we've got to be reacting in a solid way so that Mr. Putin knows that this kind of activity is not he doesn't have a free pass.
But Senator, it seems that the U.S. still cannot or won't say for certainty who brought down the plane and Russia, particularly Putin's involvement. What's holding us back at this point?
Well, I think this may be one of those moments, one of those sort of UN moments, if you remember Adlai Stevenson in the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we put the evidence out there. I think the evidence is quite clear. Smaller, handheld, shoulder-mounted devices couldn't get to the altitude of that airplane. It had to be a surface-to-air missile. And I'm assuming that the White House wants to be absolutely sure of the data before they put something out there. But I think most people are assuming.
Do you think it's lack of intelligence at this point or unwillingness to sort of reveal how the U.S. gathered this intelligence to begin with?
Well, it may be a little bit of both. I am not privy to that. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. We've discussed this, but there is always the concern of not wanting the other side to know exactly what you know and how you know it. But on the other hand, I think the world should know exactly how this came about. It's also possible that we don't know precisely, that we can say it came from a missile launcher in eastern Ukraine, but, who pulled the trigger, who was on the truck that day is pretty hard to determine.
Are there any circumstances where you would support arming the Ukrainian military?
Well, I think that a case can be made to provide support to them. Arming with lethal arms, I think, is a different question. That's not really what they need. My understanding is it's a pretty well-equipped army, but some resupply and things that we can provide, I think we should and are. We got to be careful, though, Alex. Next Monday is the 100th anniversary of the Guns of August, the beginning of the tragic World War I that the world sort of stumbled into. And we're trying to pick our way through, find a way through the precedent of the Guns of August and the precedent of Munich. You want to be firm, but you don't want to get into something that spirals out of control. On the other hand, we can't appease this guy either.
Right.
So I think the president and the Europeans are well aware of both of those precedents.
And Senator, of course, it's not just Russia, it's also Gaza, it's also Iran. And I want to point out Secretary of State John Kerry did arrive in Israel earlier today talking about a ceasefire and what could be next. Take a listen.
Reaching a ceasefire clearly is not enough. It is imperative that there be a serious engagement, discussion, negotiation regarding the underlying issues and addressing all of the concerns that have brought us to where we are today.
Yeah, Senator, I know you do favor negotiation when it comes to Iran, but what about Israel? I mean, how do we get this to the negotiating table for a deeper conversation?
Well, I'll tell you, it's really tough. I was over there in the winter with Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. We talked to leadership of both the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas. The basic problem is, I think the Palestinian Authority would like to make a deal tomorrow. Hamas doesn't even recognize the right of Israel to exist, and that's why this is so hard. The Israelis are very uncomfortable making a deal with the Palestinians in the West Bank and then finding rockets coming across as they do from Gaza, because the West Bank is, as far as from me to the Washington Monument from Jerusalem. And it's so the whole issue of Hamas and their irresponsibility and just, fundamental hostility, I really, that's the hard part. Getting, as Secretary Kerry said, getting a ceasefire is number one. But number two, a longer-term settlement, as long as Hamas takes that attitude and is lobbing rockets into Israel, boy, that's a tough one.
And Senator, I just want to switch gears to wrap it up here, because something else very near and dear to your heart. You're going to lead a hearing at 10 a.m. today to discuss a bill compelling organizations that spend over $10,000 or more in an election cycle to now file a report with the SEC. I got to ask, what is the political will in Congress for something like that?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. I think the Republicans today feel that the current situation sort of favors them because of some wealthy individuals and groups that are donating. That could flip overnight with a few liberal billionaires deciding to play the same game. I'm making the point that this is a problem for our democracy. It shouldn't be viewed as a partisan problem. The so-called Disclose Act that we're going to be talking about this morning, that basically just says if you're going to put in $10,000, you got to say who you are, came within one vote of passing in the Senate 2 years ago. And so we're going to try it again. And I'm hoping that both sides will see in the long run this is something we need to do for our country. And momentary advantage isn't going to cut it.
Right. Or if they're just looking towards the 2014 midterm election. Senator Agnes King of Maine, I really appreciate your perspective today. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you, Al.
And coming